The blood on her dress had dried to rust-brown stains by the time she staggered up the last slope toward the cabin that looked like salvation through her blurring vision. Meadow Lancaster hadn't eaten in 4 days, hadn't had water in 2, and the gunshot wound in her side from the stagecoach robbery had stopped bleeding but started festering. She'd watched the bandits kill the driver, the guard, and 2 other passengers before they'd ridden off with the strongbox, leaving her for dead in the Texas scrubland. She'd crawled into a ravine, hidden there until the sun went down, then started walking. North. Always north, away from the bodies and the vultures and the men who might come back. Now, in September of 1878, with the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly on the rocky terrain outside Pecos, Texas, she could see smoke rising from a stone chimney. A cabin built solid into the mountainside, with a corral holding 2 horses and a vegetable garden that looked well-tended. Civilization, help, life. She made it 3 more steps before her legs gave out and the world tilted sideways. Vincent Irons was skinning a deer when he heard the thud. He'd been up since dawn checking his trap line in the Guadalupe Mountains, and the buck he'd brought down would keep him in venison through the winter if he dried it proper. At 32, he'd been living alone on this mountain for 6 years, ever since he'd left the cavalry and decided he'd had enough of taking orders and watching friends die. The solitude suited him. The silence suited him better. But that sound that wasn't a branch falling or an animal stumbling, that was something heavier, something wrong. He wiped his hands on his leather pants and grabbed the rifle that was never more than arm's reach away. His boots made no sound on the hard-packed earth as he moved around the side of the cabin, muscles tensed, ready for whatever trouble had found its way to his door. What he found was a woman, She lay crumpled at the base of his porch steps like a broken doll, one arm twisted beneath her, face pressed into the dirt. Her dress, once blue, he thought, though it was hard to tell through the dust and stains, was torn in several places. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever pins had held it, spreading across the ground in tangled waves. She wasn't moving. Vincent covered the distance in 3 long strides, dropping to one knee beside her. He set the rifle down and reached for her neck, fingers seeking a pulse. There, faint, rapid, but present. She was alive. He turned her over carefully, noting the way her head lolled, the pallor of her skin beneath the sunburn and dirt. His eyes traveled down, cataloging injuries with the efficiency of someone who'd seen plenty of wounded soldiers. Dehydrated, certainly. Malnourished, definitely. But then he saw the blood seeping through the side of her dress, fresh red over dried brown, and his jaw tightened. Gunshot wound. Maybe 3, 4 days old by the look of it. He didn't waste time with questions she couldn't answer. Vincent scooped her up in his arms. She weighed almost nothing, light as kindling, and carried her inside. His cabin was simple. 1 large room with a stone fireplace, a bed in one corner, a table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies and tools. He laid her on his bed, the only bed, then moved with swift purpose to gather what he needed. Water first. Always water. He dipped a clean cloth into the bucket he'd filled that morning from the spring, then returned to her side. Gently he parted her cracked lips and squeezed a few drops onto her tongue. She didn't swallow at first, and he repeated the motion, patient, until her throat finally worked reflexively. "That's it," he murmured, his voice rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken to another human in weeks. Just a little at a time. He gave her more water, drop by drop, watching her face for signs of choking. When he was satisfied she'd had enough for now, he turned his attention to the wound. He'd need to cut the dress away to see it proper, and that gave him pause. He'd been raised with manners, even if he'd spent the last 6 years living like a hermit. But modesty took second place to survival, and if he didn't clean that wound soon, infection would kill her before she ever woke up. Vincent retrieved his hunting knife, cleaned the blade with whiskey, then carefully cut through the fabric at her side. The wound beneath made him suck in a breath through his teeth. The bullet had passed through, which was good, he wouldn't have to dig it out, but the entry and exit wounds were angry red, swollen, with telltale streaks radiating outward. Infection had already set in. He heated water over the fire, added salt, and gathered the cleanest cloths he owned. Then he set to work. Vincent had tended plenty of wounds during his cavalry days. He knew what needed to be done, even if it wasn't pleasant. He cleaned the wound as thoroughly as he dared, noting with some relief that it didn't look quite as bad once the dried blood and dirt were gone. The infection was present, but not yet critical. He had yarrow growing near the spring, and he'd used it before on infected cuts with good results. "I'll be back," he told the unconscious woman, though he didn't know why. Maybe just to hear a human voice again, even if it was his own. Outside, he found the yarrow easily. The white flowering plant grew abundant in the mountains. He gathered leaves and flowers, brought them back inside, and made a poultice using hot water and a bit of honey for binding. The honey would help too. He'd learned that from an old cavalry doctor who swore by it. He applied the poultice to both sides of the wound, then bound her midsection with strips of clean linen. By the time he finished, sweat beaded his forehead despite the cooling evening air. He'd moved her as little as possible, but even so, she let out small whimpers of pain that made something in his chest tighten uncomfortably. Vincent gave her more water, still just drops at a time, then sat back and studied her face properly for the first time. She was young, mid-20s, he guessed, pretty beneath the damage that sun and hardship had done. Strong cheekbones, a straight nose, full lips that were chapped and bleeding slightly. There was a bruise forming along her jaw, purple-green against her sun-reddened skin. Her hands, when he examined them, were torn and blistered, nails broken and bleeding. She'd been crawling, he realized, probably for miles. What the hell had happened to her? The question would have to wait. Right now she needed food, but carefully. He'd seen starving men eat too much too fast and die from it. He had beef broth from yesterday's stew, and he heated it slowly over the fire, adding a bit of dried herbs and salt. When it was warm, but not hot, he brought it to her and began the painstaking process of getting it down her throat. She took it better than the water, her body responding to the scent of food, even in unconsciousness. He fed her nearly half a cup over the course of an hour, then decided that was enough for now. Too much would make her sick. Night had fallen fully by the time he'd finished tending to her. Vincent stood, stretched his back, and looked down at the woman in his bed. She hadn't woken, but her breathing seemed easier, less labored. Her pulse, when he checked it, was steadier. She might actually survive this. The thought brought an unfamiliar flutter of something relief, maybe, or hope. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed having a purpose beyond simple survival, until faced with someone who needed him. Vincent dragged his bedroll from the corner and spread it on the floor near the fire. He'd sleep there tonight, within earshot in case she woke or took a turn for the worse. He added wood to the fire to keep the cabin warm through the cool mountain night, then lay down with his rifle beside him. Sleep came slowly. He found himself listening to her breathing, the small sounds she made as she shifted restlessly. Once she cried out a wordless sound of distress, and he was on his feet before he'd fully registered moving. But she settled again, whatever nightmare plagued her retreating back into the depths of her unconscious mind. "You're safe now," he said quietly into the darkness. "Whatever happened, whoever hurt you, they won't find you here." It was a promise. Vincent Irons didn't make promises lightly. Dawn came pale and golden through the cabin's small windows. Vincent woke with it, as he always did, his body attuned to the rhythms of the mountain. He checked on the woman first thing, still breathing, still unconscious, but her forehead felt cooler when he pressed the back of his hand to it. The fever hadn't broken yet, but it hadn't gotten worse either. He changed the poultice on her wound, pleased to see that the angry redness had faded slightly overnight. The yarrow was working. He gave her more water and broth, then stepped outside to attend to his morning chores. The horses needed feeding, the chickens needed tending, and he had that deer to finish processing before the meat spoiled. He worked methodically, but his mind kept drifting back to the cabin, to the woman lying in his bed. Who was she? Where had she come from? The nearest town was Pecos, 15 miles south as the crow flew farther if you followed the trails. Had she walked all that way wounded? And who had shot her? That question bothered him most. Vincent had left civilization behind to escape violence, but it seemed violence had followed him anyway, delivered to his doorstep in the form of a dying woman. By midday, he'd finished with the deer and had venison steaks drying on racks in the smokehouse. He washed up at the spring, then carried fresh water back to the cabin. Inside, he found his patient stirring. Her eyes moved beneath closed lids. Her fingers twitched. As he watched, she made a sound something between a moan and a word, and her head turned on the pillow. Vincent set down the water bucket and moved to her side. Easy now, he said, pitching his voice low and calm. You're safe. You're hurt, but you're safe. Her eyes opened. They were green, not the pale green of new leaves, but the deep green of pine forests. They were also unfocused, clouded with fever and confusion. She stared at him without recognition, without comprehension, and he could see the moment panic began to set in. Hey, he said quickly, keeping his hands where she could see them, non-threatening. It's all right. You collapsed outside my cabin yesterday. I brought you inside, tended your wounds. You're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you. She tried to speak, but only a croak emerged. Her tongue darted out to wet her lips. Vincent grabbed the cup of water and slid one arm beneath her shoulders, lifting her just enough to drink. Slow, he cautioned. Small sips. She drank desperately, and he had to pull the cup away before she made herself sick. She made a small sound of protest, reaching for it with weak hands. More in a minute, he promised. Your stomach's been empty too long. Too much water too fast will make you sick. She slumped back against his arm, and he realized he was still supporting her. She was warm against him, her body fever hot through the thin blanket he'd covered her with. He could feel each individual rib, the sharp jut of her collarbone. How long had she been without food before she was shot? After counting to 30, he gave her more water. This time she drank slower, more controlled. When she'd had enough, he lowered her back down and she let out a shaky breath. Thank you. Her voice was barely a whisper, rough as sandpaper. Don't thank me yet, Vincent said. You've got an infection from that bullet wound. It's not bad, but it's not good either. You need rest and food and time to heal. Her brow furrowed. Bullet? In your side. Someone shot you. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed immediately by terror. She tried to sit up, moving too fast, and the pain hit her. She cried out and fell back, her hand going to her bandaged side. Don't move, Vincent ordered, his hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle. You'll tear the wound open again. She was breathing hard, her eyes wide and wild. They killed them, she gasped. They killed everyone, the driver, the guard, the others. They shot them all and took the strongbox and I hid, but one of them saw me and he shot me and I thought... You're safe, Vincent repeated, his voice steady and certain. Whatever happened, whoever they were, you're safe now. They're not here. This is my mountain, and nothing gets up here without me knowing about it. She searched his face, looking for the lie, for the trick. He let her look, keeping his expression open. Finally, some of the panic faded from her eyes. Stagecoach robbery, she whispered. 3 days south, maybe 4? I don't know. I walked. You walked, Vincent repeated slowly, trying to comprehend it. For 4 days? With a bullet wound? Crawled sometimes. A tear slid from the corner of her eye into her hair. I couldn't stay there with the bodies. The vultures came. His jaw tightened. What's your name? She blinked as if the question surprised her. Meadow Lancaster. I'm Vincent Irons. This is my cabin. You're about 15 miles north of Pecos, up in the Guadalupe Mountains. He paused. You're safe here, Meadow. I need you to understand that. You're safe, and I'm going to help you get better. But you need to rest and let your body heal. She nodded weakly. The others? He knew what she was asking. If they were killed like you said, there's nothing to be done for them now. When you're stronger, when the infection's gone, we'll figure out what to do. But right now, your only job is to heal. Another tear fell, then another. She closed her eyes, her face crumpling, and he realized she was crying in earnest, now, silent, exhausted tears that spoke of trauma and grief and relief all mixed together. Vincent didn't know what to do. Comforting crying women wasn't something he had experience with, but some instinct made him reach out and take her hand carefully, giving her the chance to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Instead, her fingers curled around his, gripping with what little strength she had. It's all right, he said quietly. Let it out. You're allowed. So she did. She cried until she had no tears left, until exhaustion pulled her back under. Even then, she didn't let go of his hand. Vincent sat there on the floor beside his bed, his back against the wall, her hand in his, and watched her sleep. This changed things. He'd been content in his solitude, but that life felt suddenly distant. Now he had responsibility. He had purpose. He had a woman to protect and heal, and somewhere south of here, there were men who'd murdered innocent people and left this woman for dead. That thought made something dark and cold settle in his chest, but he pushed it aside. Vengeance could wait. Right now, Meadow Lancaster needed him, and he'd be damned if he'd let her down. The days blurred together in a haze of fever and pain and gentle hands. Meadow drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes waking to find sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows, sometimes opening her eyes to firelight dancing on log walls. Always, Vincent was nearby. She began to recognize the sound of his footsteps, the low rumble of his voice when he spoke to her, the careful way he changed her bandages and fed her broth and water. On the third day, or was it the fourth? The fever finally broke. She woke clear-headed for the first time since arriving, though weak as a newborn kitten. The cabin was dim with early morning light. Across the room, she could see Vincent sleeping on the floor near the fire, one arm pillowed beneath his head, the other resting on his rifle. She studied him in the gray dawn light. He was massive, easily over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed too broad for the space he occupied. His arms were corded with muscle, visible even in sleep where his shirt had pulled back from his wrist. Dark hair fell past his collar, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. He looked exactly like what he was, a man carved from the mountains themselves, hard and strong and unyielding. But his hands, when they tended her wounds, were infinitely gentle. As if sensing her gaze, his eyes opened. They were gray. She noticed the gray of storm clouds. He sat up in one fluid motion, instantly alert. "You're awake." He rose and crossed to her, pressing his hand to her forehead before she could respond. A slow smile transformed his face. "Fever's gone." "How long?" Her voice was still rough but stronger than before. 5 days since you collapsed at my door. The infection turned bad on the second day, but you fought through it." He sat on the edge of the bed, his bed, she realized with a flutter of embarrassment. "How do you feel?" "Weak, sore, hungry." She paused. "Grateful." "Don't be grateful yet. I need to check your wound." He was all business as he helped her sit up slowly, carefully, and unwrap the bandage at her side. She looked down and saw the angry red holes where the bullet had entered and exited. They were scabbed over now, the infection mostly cleared, though the surrounding skin was still tender and swollen. "Healing well," Vincent pronounced. He applied a fresh poultice, something that smelled of herbs and honey, and rewrapped her midsection with clean cloth. His hands never strayed beyond what was necessary, his touch purely professional. "Another week and you should be able to move around. 2 weeks and you'll be mostly healed, though you'll have scars." "I don't care about scars," Meadow said quietly. "I care about being alive." Their eyes met. Something passed between them, understanding, recognition. He'd saved her life. She'd been hours from death when she'd found his cabin, and they both knew it. "I'll make breakfast," Vincent said, breaking the moment. He stood and moved to the fireplace, adding wood and stoking the coals back to life. "Real food this time. You need to build your strength back." She watched him work, noting the efficiency of his movements, the way he seemed to know exactly where everything was without looking. This was a man comfortable in his space, in his solitude. And she'd invaded it. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. He glanced back at her, eyebrows raised. "For what?" "For imposing on you, for disrupting your life, for—" She gestured helplessly at herself. "All of this. You didn't ask to be shot." His tone was matter-of-fact. "You didn't ask for your stagecoach to be robbed. You survived and you found help. That's nothing to apologize for. Still, you've been sleeping on the floor. I've slept in worse places, and taking care of me day and night. I don't need much sleep. And you don't even know me." That made him pause. He turned from the fire to face her fully, a cast-iron pan in one hand. "I know you're strong," he said. "I know you survived something that should have killed you. I know you crawled for miles with a bullet wound because you refused to give up. That's enough for me." Warmth that had nothing to do with fever spread through her chest. She looked down at her hands, at the healing blisters and torn nails, evidence of her desperate journey. "Tell me about the robbery," Vincent said as he cracked eggs into the pan. The sizzle filled the cabin with a sound that made her stomach growl. "If you can." Meadow took a breath and let it out slowly. I was traveling from Fort Worth to El Paso. My father died 3 months ago, and I'd been staying with my aunt in Fort Worth while I figured out what to do. My father had a small ranch outside El Paso, nothing much, but it's mine now. I thought I'd try to run it, or at least see it before I sold it. You were alone? Yes. There were 4 other passengers, a merchant and his wife, and 2 men I didn't know. The driver and guard made 7 total. She closed her eyes, seeing it again. They came out of nowhere. 6 men, maybe 7, all masked. They shot the driver first, then the guard when he tried to fight back. One of the passengers had a gun, tried to use it. They killed him too. Vincent's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. The merchant's wife was screaming. One of the bandits hit her with his rifle, told her to shut up or he'd kill her too. They made us all get out, took everything, money, jewelry, the strongbox. Then they argued about what to do with us. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Most of them wanted to let us go, but one man said we'd seen their faces, could identify them. Another said no one would believe a bunch of stagecoach passengers anyway. But they killed them anyway. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. I ran. When they started shooting, I just ran. I didn't think. I just moved. There was a ravine, and I jumped and rolled down into it. That's when one of them saw me and fired. The bullet hit me, and I fell the rest of the way down. I landed in some brush and stayed there, not moving, barely breathing. I heard them up above, discussing whether to come down after me. But the ravine was steep, and I'd fallen far. One of them said I was probably dead anyway, and they needed to go, so they left. You stayed in that ravine. Until dark. Then I climbed out and started walking north. I knew Pecos was south, but I was afraid they'd gone back that way. So I went north, hoping to find a ranch or a cabin or something. She opened her eyes and looked at him. I found you. Vincent brought her a plate of eggs and bacon, along with a biscuit he'd warmed by the fire. Eat slowly, he cautioned. Your stomach's still adjusting. The food tasted like heaven. She forced herself to take small bites, to chew thoroughly, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour it. He sat at the table with his own plate, giving her space but keeping her in sight. Those men, he said finally. Would you recognize them if you saw them again? Maybe, some of them. They had bandanas over their faces, but I saw eyes, heard voices. She paused, a bite of egg halfway to her mouth. Why? Because eventually someone's going to need to tell the sheriff what happened. Those people deserve justice, and those men deserve to hang. I can't go back there, Meadow said, and hated how her voice shook. I can't go back to where it happened. You won't have to. Not alone anyway, and not until you're healed. His gray eyes were steady on hers. But you will have to go eventually. You know that. She did know. But the thought of leaving this cabin, this mountain, this man who'd saved her life, it made her throat tight with an emotion she couldn't name. Finish eating, Vincent said, his tone gentling. We'll worry about the rest later. So she ate, and he asked her about her life before. She told him about her father, a cattle rancher who'd never quite recovered after her mother died of pneumonia when Meadow was 12. She told him about growing up on a small ranch, learning to ride and rope and shoot, though she'd been traveling unarmed when the robbery happened. She told him about her aunt in Fort Worth, a proper city lady who'd been horrified by Meadow's lack of refinement and spent 3 months trying to turn her into someone she wasn't. I didn't fit there, she said. I'm not meant for cities and tea parties and dresses that require a maid to get into. I wanted to come home to Texas, to open spaces, even if it meant running a ranch alone. You know how to run a ranch? I grew up on one. I can ride, rope, brand, fix fences. I'm not afraid of hard work. She met his eyes. I'm not helpless, despite what these past few days might suggest. I never thought you were helpless, Vincent said. Helpless women don't survive being shot and walk for days through the mountains. The approval in his voice made that warmth bloom in her chest again. She looked away, suddenly shy and focused on finishing her food. After breakfast, she insisted on getting up. Vincent objected, but she was firm. I can't stay in bed forever, she said. I need to move or I'll lose what strength I have left. He helped her stand, keeping one arm around her waist to steady her. The cabin tilted alarmingly, and she gripped his shoulder until the dizziness passed. His body was solid as stone beneath her hand, warm and real and present. All right? He asked. Yes, just give me a moment. They stood there in the middle of his cabin, her hand on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, breathing together until the world steadied. She became aware of how close they were, of the heat of him, of how small she felt next to his size. She was tall for a woman 5'7", but he dwarfed her. "Let's try walking," Vincent said. His voice had gone rough again, the way it did when he was uncomfortable. They walked slowly around the cabin, her leaning on him matching his pace to hers. By the time they'd made 2 circuits, she was exhausted and shaking. He helped her back to bed, and she didn't protest when he pulled the blanket up to her chin. "Rest," he ordered. "This afternoon we'll try again." She wanted to argue, but her eyes were already closing. The last thing she saw was Vincent settling back into his chair by the fire, always watching, always vigilant, always there. The days developed a rhythm. Each morning, Vincent would wake before dawn and tend to his outside chores while Meadow slept. He'd return to make breakfast, and they'd eat together, talking about small things, the weather, the deer he'd seen at the spring, the eagle that nested on the cliff face. After breakfast, they'd walk around the cabin until her strength gave out. Then she'd rest while he worked repairing tack, cleaning his guns, carving small wooden figures that he claimed were just to keep his hands busy. She healed slowly but steadily. By the end of the first week, she could walk unaided. By the end of the second, she could stand at the window for long stretches, looking out at the mountains that rolled away in every direction, purple and gold in the afternoon light. "It's beautiful here," she said one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. She'd insisted on helping cook, and he'd let her, though he'd hovered nearby like she might collapse at any moment. "It is," he agreed. "That's why I came here. After the cavalry, after the war and the fighting, I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere clean. You were in the war. Tail end of it. I was only 17 when I enlisted in 1863. Lied about my age." He stared into the fire. "By the time it ended, I'd seen enough killing to last a lifetime. Stayed in the cavalry afterward because I didn't know what else to do. Spent years chasing Comanche and Apache, fighting people who just wanted to keep their land. Started feeling wrong about it. So I left, came here, built this cabin with my own hands. Do you ever regret it? The solitude?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I did at first. It's hard being alone with your thoughts all the time. But I got used to it. Started to prefer it even." He glanced at her. "Though I'll admit, having someone to talk to has been nice." Nice. Such a small word for the way her heart leapt when he said it. "I should be well enough to leave soon," Meadow said, though the words tasted bitter. "I'll need to get to Pecos, send word to my aunt, figure out how to get to my father's ranch." "You're not going anywhere alone," Vincent said firmly. "Those men who robbed the stage are still out there, and you'll need to report what happened to the sheriff." "I can't ask you to leave your home." "You're not asking. I'm telling you." He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense. "Meadow, you nearly died. Those men are killers. I won't let you travel alone, and that's final." She should have been annoyed by his high-handedness. Instead, she felt protected. Safe. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once, then turned back to the fire. But she saw the tension in his shoulders ease slightly, and she knew he'd been worried she'd argue. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned low. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the peaks. Somewhere distant, a wolf howled. "Vincent," she waited until he looked at her. "Why did you help me? You could have. I mean, some men wouldn't have. Some men would have taken advantage." His expression darkened. "I'm not some men. You needed help, so I helped. It's that simple." "Nothing's that simple." "It is to me," he held her gaze. "You're a person in trouble. I have the means to help. That's all the reason I need." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. She'd known men in her life, her father, ranch hands, cowboys, soldiers passing through. But she'd never known anyone quite like Vincent Irons. He was hard as the mountains he called home, but there was a gentleness in him too, a core of decency that couldn't be hidden. "You're a good man," she said. He looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm just a man. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we'll try walking outside if you're up for it." She was up for it. More than up for it. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect September weather. Vincent helped her into a coat, one of his, far too large but warm, and they stepped outside together. The view stole her breath. The cabin sat on a natural shelf of rock, protected on three sides by the mountain itself, but the front opened onto a vista that seemed to stretch forever. Mountains rolled away to the horizon, covered in pine and juniper. The sky was impossibly blue, unmarred by clouds. In the distance, she could see birds, eagles, or hawks circling on thermals. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, it's beautiful." Vincent watched her face rather than the view. "Come on, I want to show you something." He led her along a narrow path that wound around the side of the cabin. She moved slowly, mindful of her still healing wound, but determined. The path opened onto a small clearing where a spring bubbled up from between rocks, creating a clear pool before the water trickled away down the mountainside. "This is where I get my water," Vincent said. "Sweetest spring in the mountains," or so the old Apache woman who told me about this place claimed. She was right. He knelt and cupped his hands, offering her water. She drank from his palms, the water so cold and pure it made her teeth ache. He was right, it was sweet, with a mineral clarity that spoke of deep rock and ancient aquifers. "Thank you," she said, and meant it for more than just the water. They sat by the spring for a while, listening to it burble and splash. A jay scolded them from a nearby tree. Meadow closed her eyes and turned her face to the sun, feeling truly warm for the first time since the robbery. Here, in this moment, it was possible to forget about violence and death and the uncertain future. "I could stay here forever," she said without thinking. When she opened her eyes, Vincent was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Could you?" he asked quietly. The question hung between them, weighted with meaning she was afraid to examine too closely. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. Everything I planned going to my father's ranch, starting over it all, feels different now." "Different how? Smaller maybe, or less important? I don't know how to explain it." She pulled the coat tighter around herself. "When you face death, when you're certain you're going to die, and then you don't, it changes things, changes you." "I know," Vincent said. He was staring at the spring now, not at her. "I felt that way after the war, like I'd been given a second chance I didn't necessarily deserve, and I needed to figure out what to do with it." "Did you? Figure it out?" "I thought I had. I thought the answer was solitude, self-sufficiency, staying away from people and their problems." He paused. "Now I'm not so sure." Her heart was beating too fast. What changed? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something in his gray eyes that made her breath catch. "You did," he said simply. The words hung in the air between them. Meadow knew she should say something, but every response that came to mind felt inadequate. Instead, she reached out and took his hand the same way he'd held hers during her fever dreams, anchor and comfort and promise all at once. His fingers closed around hers, rough with calluses but infinitely gentle. They sat that way until the sun climbed higher and the day grew warm, neither speaking, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them. That night, Meadow lay in bed, still as bed, though she'd offered repeatedly to take the floor, and stared at the ceiling. Across the room she could hear Vincent's steady breathing, could see the bulk of his form by the dying firelight. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have terrified her, should have sent her running despite her injuries. She barely knew him. He'd saved her life, yes, but that didn't require, except it did. Not the love itself, but the gratitude and respect that formed its foundation. And beyond that, there was the way he listened when she spoke, really listened, like her words mattered. The way he smiled rarely, but genuinely when she said something that amused him. The way he touched her when changing her bandages, professional but caring, never once making her feel exposed or vulnerable in a way that wasn't about her wounds. The way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't paying attention, like she was something precious and fragile and brave all at once. She was falling in love, and she hoped he might be falling too. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She'd been courted before, back when her father was alive and the ranch had been successful. Cowboys and neighboring ranchers' sons had come calling. She'd even been engaged once, briefly, to a man her father had approved of. But she'd broken it off when she realized she felt nothing for him beyond mild affection. What she felt for Vincent Irons was not mild. It was fire and safety, desire and trust, wrapped together so tightly she couldn't separate them. Tomorrow, she decided, Tomorrow she'd start pulling her weight around the cabin, showing him she was capable, that she could be a partner and not just a burden. Tomorrow she'd figure out how to tell him or show him what was growing in her heart. Tomorrow. But tomorrow brought trouble instead. Meadow woke to the sound of horses, multiple horses, moving fast. Vincent was already up, rifle in hand, peering out the window. "Stay in bed," he ordered. "Don't move, don't make a sound." She could hear the tension in his voice and obeyed instantly, pulling the blanket up and trying to make herself small. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Through the window she heard men's voices getting closer. 3 riders, maybe 4 from the sound of it. They were talking loudly, laughing about something. "Hello, the cabin!" one of them shouted. "Anyone home?" Vincent waited a long moment before responding. "I'm home. What do you want?" "Saw your smoke from the valley. Haven't seen another soul in days. Thought we'd be neighborly. See if you had any supplies to spare." Meadow's blood ran cold. That voice, she knew that voice. It was one of them. One of the men from the stagecoach robbery. She caught Vincent's eye and shook her head frantically, pressing her finger to her lips and pointing at the window. His eyes narrowed in understanding. These weren't travelers. These were the killers. "I don't have much to spare," Vincent called back. "Been a hard season." "Aw, don't be that way." A different voice this time, younger, with a cruel edge. "We're willing to pay for food and water for our horses, unless you want to be unfriendly about it." The threat was clear. Vincent's jaw tightened. Meadow knew what he was thinking. He could fight them, probably even kill them. But gunfire would draw questions, and there might be more of them nearby. "Wait there," Vincent said. "I'll bring out what I can spare." He moved to her side quickly, keeping low. "Stay hidden," he whispered. "If things go bad, there's a root cellar under that rug by the table. Get in it and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "Vincent, promise me." "I promise." He grabbed some jerky and hardtack from his supplies, filled a canteen with water, then took a breath and stepped outside. Meadow slid from the bed and crept to the window where she could see without being seen. There were 4 of them, just as she'd feared. Rough-looking men on rougher-looking horses, all armed. The one who'd called out was tall and thin, with a scar running down his cheek. She recognized him. He'd been the one who'd wanted to kill all the witnesses. Vincent approached with his rifle slung casually over his shoulder, projecting confidence and control. "Here," he said, holding out the food and water. "That's all I can spare." Scarface took the offerings with a sneer. "That's mighty generous of you." He made a show of looking around. "Nice place you got here. All alone, are you?" "Just me and the mountain." "See, that's funny, because we heard tell there might be a woman wandering around up here. Got separated from her traveling party, if you know what I mean." His eyes were sharp, calculating. "You wouldn't happen to have seen anyone like that, would you?" Vincent's expression didn't change. "Haven't seen anyone in weeks. Like I said, just me and the mountain." "Mind if we look around? Just to be sure." "I do mind. This is my property, and you're not welcome on it. You've got food and water. Time to move on." The 4 men exchanged glances. Meadow could see them calculating odds, weighing their desire to search against the threat of the big man with the rifle. She held her breath. "Easy now," Scarface said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "No need to be hostile. We're just looking for someone, that's all. She saw something she shouldn't have, and we need to make sure she doesn't talk about it. You understand?" "I understand you're murderers," Vincent said flatly. "I understand you robbed a stagecoach and killed innocent people. I understand you're afraid a witness survived." The pretense dropped away. Scarface's hand moved toward his gun. "So you have seen her?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Scarface smiled, showing yellow teeth. "She's here, isn't she? In that cabin? Maybe we should just take a look." Vincent's rifle came up so fast it was a blur. "Take 1 step toward that cabin, and I'll put a bullet between your eyes." For a frozen moment, nobody moved. Meadow pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. Inside the cabin, she could see the rug that covered the root cellar. She should go there, hide like Vincent told her, but she couldn't make herself move, couldn't tear her eyes away from the standoff. "4 of us, one of you?" one of the other men said. "You can't take us all." "Maybe not, but I'll damn sure take him first." Vincent's rifle never wavered from Scarface's head. "And at least 1 more before you get me. Question is, which one of you wants to die today?" Silence. The horses shifted nervously, sensing the tension. "This isn't over," Scarface said finally. He pulled his horse's reins, backing away. "We'll be watching, waiting. And when you leave, and you will leave, everyone does eventually, will be there." "Looking forward to it," Vincent said coldly. The four men rode off, but Meadow could see them looking back, memorizing the location. When they were finally out of sight, Vincent lowered his rifle and came quickly inside. "Are you all right?" He checked her over as if looking for injuries. "I'm fine, but Vincent, they know I'm here. They'll come back. Not if I can help it." His face was grim. "Pack what you need. We're leaving for Pecos at first light tomorrow." "But you're home." "We'll still be here when we get back. Right now, getting you to safety is more important." He moved around the cabin with purpose, gathering supplies, checking ammunition. "In Pecos, we'll find the sheriff. Report what happened. Those men will hang for what they did. And if they're waiting for us on the trail, then I'll deal with them." The certainty in his voice was absolute. Meadow wanted to argue, wanted to tell him not to risk himself for her, but she'd seen the look in Scarface's eyes. He wouldn't give up. He'd keep coming until either she was dead or he was. "Together," she said firmly. "If we're doing this, we're doing it together. I can shoot, I can ride, and I won't be dead weight." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Together." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Vincent brought the horses up from the corral, two strong mountain-bred animals that could handle rough terrain. He packed food, ammunition, bedrolls, medical supplies. Meadow checked and rechecked the rifle he gave her, familiarizing herself with its weight and action. Her side still ached, but it was manageable. She could do this. She would do this. As the sun set, Vincent made dinner a hearty stew that would fuel them for the hard ride ahead. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "Vincent," Meadow said finally, "why are you doing this? You could just... I could go alone. You've already done so much." "No." He set down his spoon and met her eyes. "You're not going alone, and I'm not staying here while you ride into danger. That's not up for discussion." "But why? You don't owe me anything." "Maybe I do. Maybe I owe you for reminding me that there are things worth fighting for beyond just staying alive. Maybe I owe you for making me remember what it's like to care about someone." He paused. "Or maybe I'm just being selfish because the thought of you getting hurt makes me want to tear the world apart." Her breath caught. "Vincent, I know it's too soon. I know we barely know each other. But these past weeks, having you here, talking with you, watching you heal..." He broke off, running a hand through his dark hair. "I haven't felt this way about anyone, ever. And I'll be damned if I lose you to those bastards before I even get a chance to tell you that." Meadow stood and crossed to him. His eyes widened as she cupped his face in her hands, feeling the roughness of his beard against her palms. "You're not going to lose me," she said, "and it's not too soon. I feel it too, whatever this is between us. I think I started falling for you when I woke up and saw you sleeping on the floor because you'd given me your bed. Or maybe it was earlier, when I was still fevered and I could feel you holding my hand through the darkness." "Meadow." She kissed him. It was gentle at first, tentative, neither of them quite believing this was real. But then his arms came around her, careful of her wound, and he kissed her back with a desperate tenderness that made her knees weak. He tasted like coffee and hope, and she pressed closer, wanting more, wanting everything. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "We should sleep," he said, his voice rough. "We have a long ride tomorrow." "Stay with me," she whispered. "Not like that, just stay. I don't want to be alone tonight." So he did. They lay together in his bed, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist, and fell asleep to the sound of each other's breathing. They left before dawn, when the world was still gray and cold. Vincent led the way on his big roan gelding, with Meadow following on a smaller chestnut mare. They took a route he knew, a trail that wound through high passes and narrow defiles, harder than the main path, but less likely to have company. The ride was brutal. Every mile jarred Meadow's healing wound, and by midday she had to bite her lip against small sounds of pain. But she didn't complain, didn't ask to stop. Vincent glanced back at her frequently, concern clear in his eyes, but she always gave him a brave smile. They made camp that night in a sheltered canyon, building a small fire that couldn't be seen from the main trails. Vincent tended to her wound, changing the bandage and applying more of the yarrow poultice. The rough riding had torn one of the scabs and fresh blood seeped through. "I should have given you more time to heal," he said, guilt lacing his voice. "We didn't have time. Those men weren't going to wait." She caught his hand. "I'm all right. A little blood isn't going to kill me." He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead, he just finished bandaging her and pulled her close. They sat by the fire, her leaning against his chest, his arms around her. The night was full of sounds, whined in the rocks, an owl hunting, the distant yip of coyotes. "Tell me about your ranch," Vincent said. "The one your father left you." "It's small, maybe 1,000 acres, with a house and a barn and some outbuildings. Last I heard, the foreman my father hired was still running things, but I don't know how it's doing. I was supposed to go there 3 months ago after Father died, but Aunt Susan convinced me to come to Fort Worth first, said I needed time to grieve, to figure out what I really wanted." She paused. "I think she hoped I'd give up on ranching, marry someone respectable, become a proper lady." "Is that what you want?" "No, I want the land and the horses and the work. I want to build something with my own hands." She twisted to look up at him. "What about you? Will you go back to your cabin after this is done?" "I don't know," he admitted. "A few weeks ago I would have said yes without hesitation, but now—" His arms tightened around her. "Now I'm not sure where I belong anymore." She wanted to say more, wanted to ask what that meant, but exhaustion was pulling at her. The combination of hard riding and pain medication Vincent had given her was making her eyelids heavy. "Sleep," he murmured. "I'll keep watch." "You need sleep too." "I'll sleep later. Right now, keeping you safe is more important." She wanted to protest, but she was already drifting off, lulled by his heartbeat and the warmth of the fire. The next day brought them down out of the high mountains and into rougher country scrubland dotted with mesquite and cactus, the terrain growing more familiar as they neared Pecos. They pushed hard, and by late afternoon they could see the town in the distance. That's when the riders appeared. They came from both sides, cutting off escape. 6 of them this time, including Scarface and his 3 companions from the cabin. Vincent pulled up short, his hand going to his rifle. "Well, well," Scarface called out, grinning. "Look who decided to come down from his mountain, and he brought our little witness with him. How convenient." "Let her go," Vincent said. "Your quarrel is with me now." "Oh, I don't think so. See, she's the only one who can identify us. Can't have her talking to the sheriff now, can we?" He gestured to his men. "Take her. Kill him." Everything happened at once. Vincent's rifle came up and fired, and one of the bandits fell from his horse. Then Vincent was off his own horse, using it for cover, firing again. Meadow yanked her rifle from its scabbard and fired at the nearest rider. She missed, not used to shooting from horseback, but it made him flinch and gave Vincent time to down another man. "Ride!" Vincent shouted at her. "Ride for town!" "I'm not leaving you! Ride, damn it!" 3 men were down, but 3 more were closing in, and Vincent only had so much ammunition. Meadow made a split-second decision. She kicked her horse hard and charged at Scarface, screaming like a banshee. He wasn't expecting a wounded woman to attack, and his horse shied sideways. The distraction was enough. Vincent took down another man, then another. Only Scarface remained, and he was fighting to control his panicking horse. Vincent strode forward, rifle aimed at the bandit's chest. "It's over," he said. "Your men are dead. You're going to jail, and then you're going to hang." Scarface looked around at his fallen companions, at the blood soaking into the Texas dirt. Something desperate and wild came into his eyes. "If I'm going to hang anyway?" He went for his gun. Vincent fired. Scarface toppled from his horse and lay still. Silence fell over the scrubland, broken only by the sound of labored breathing and the nervous stamping of horses. Vincent lowered his rifle and turned to Meadow. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. The reality of what had just happened was crashing over her 6 men, dead, blood everywhere, and she'd almost died. Again. Vincent crossed to her and pulled her off her horse into his arms. She clung to him, shaking, as the adrenaline drained away and left her weak. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "It's over. You're safe now." They rode into Pecos an hour later, leading horses laden with bodies. The sight brought people running, and within minutes they were surrounded by townspeople and the sheriff. a grizzled man in his 50s who took one look at the situation and herded them into his office. "All right," Sheriff Davis said once they were settled. "Someone want to tell me what the hell happened?" So they did. Meadow told the story of the stagecoach robbery, of surviving and finding Vincent's cabin, of the bandits tracking her down. Vincent corroborated everything, showing the sheriff the location of the robbery on a map and describing the men they'd killed in self-defense. "We'll need to ride out to the site of the robbery," the sheriff said. "Recover the bodies if we can, see if we can find that strongbox, and I'll need you both to make formal statements." He looked at Meadow. "Young lady, you're lucky to be alive." "I know, sir. Vincent saved my life multiple times." The sheriff's eyes moved between them, noting the way Vincent stood close to her, protective, and the way she leaned into him. "I see. Well, you'll both need to stay in town for a few days while we sort this out. There's a hotel down the street." "One room," Vincent said firmly. The sheriff's eyebrows rose, but Meadow spoke up before he could comment. "One room," she confirmed, meeting his gaze steadily. "We're together." "All right then. One room." He made a note in his ledger. "Go get settled. I'll need your statements tomorrow morning." They got a room at the hotel, small but clean, with a real bed and a wash basin. Meadow sank onto the bed with a groan of relief, her wound throbbing after 2 days of hard riding. Vincent knelt in front of her and carefully removed her boots. "We need to check your bandages," he said. She let him examine her wound, which had bled through the wrapping again but didn't look worse than before. He cleaned it and applied a fresh bandage with supplies he'd packed, his touch as gentle as always. "You charged Scarface," he said quietly. "You were supposed to ride for town. You were outnumbered. I could have handled it. Maybe. But why should you have to?" She caught his face in her hands, making him look at her. "We're in this together, remember? That means I don't leave you to fight alone." His jaw worked as he struggled with some emotion. Finally, he leaned forward and kissed her, hard and desperate, and she kissed him back with everything she had. When they broke apart, his eyes were fierce. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he said. "Then don't tell me to leave you behind." They stared at each other for a long moment, both stubborn, both unwilling to back down. Then Vincent laughed an actual laugh, rough and surprised, and pulled her into his arms. "We're going to drive each other crazy," he said. "Probably," she agreed, "but I think I'm all right with that." They stayed in Pecos for 4 days, while the sheriff and his deputies rode out to the robbery site, recovered the bodies and the strongbox, and pieced together the story of the bandit gang. Turned out they were wanted for 3 other robberies and 2 murders across West Texas. The strongbox contained nearly $10,000 in banknotes, which would be returned to its rightful owner. During those 4 days, Vincent and Meadow existed in a strange bubble. They gave their statements, answered questions, dealt with the practical matters of justice, but in between, they were just together, walking around town, eating in restaurants, sleeping in the same bed, and learning each other's patterns and habits. On the 4th night, as they lay tangled together after making love for the first time, Meadow traced patterns on Vincent's broad chest and tried to find the courage to ask the question that had been building in her mind. "What happens now?" she said finally. He was quiet for a moment, his hand moving through her hair. "What do you want to happen?" She took a breath. "I want you. I want this. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want to know you'll be there." "I will be, always." He shifted so he could see her face. "But what about your ranch? Your father's legacy? Come with me. Help me run it. We'll build something together, a real home, a real life." She searched his eyes. "Unless you need the mountains. Unless the solitude is too important." "The mountains are just a place," Vincent said, "and solitude doesn't mean much when you found someone you'd rather be with." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. "I'll go wherever you go, Meadow Lancaster. Mountains, ranch, the middle of the damn desert doesn't matter, as long as we're together." Joy flooded through her, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Is that a proposal? Vincent Irons? Might be, or might be a statement of fact." He grinned that rare, genuine smile that transformed his face. "But if you want it to be a proposal, then yes. Marry me. Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to face danger alone again." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." They were married a week later by the circuit judge who came through Pecos. The ceremony was simple, just the two of them, the judge and the sheriff, as a witness. Meadow wore a new dress she'd bought with some of the reward money the stage company had given her for helping identify the bandits. Vincent wore a new shirt and had actually trimmed his beard, though his hair still fell past his collar. "Do you, Vincent Irons, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the judge intoned. "I do." His voice was steady, his gray eyes locked on hers. And do you, Meadow Lancaster, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Texas, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Vincent did, thoroughly, and she laughed against his mouth, deliriously happy. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, then set out the next morning for her father's ranch. The journey took 3 days, riding easy to spare Meadow's still healing side. They talked about everything and nothing, what they'd plant in the garden, how many cattle the land could support, whether they should get chickens or just buy eggs from neighbors. The ranch, when they reached it, was smaller than Vincent's cabin, but in good repair. The foreman, a weathered man named Jack, was surprised to see her, but welcomed her warmly. Even more surprising was how quickly he accepted Vincent. "Madam's got herself a good man," he said after meeting Vincent. "Strong, knows his way around livestock. We'll make this place profitable again." And they did. Over the next months, Vincent threw himself into the work of ranching with the same focus he'd once applied to surviving in the mountains. He mended fences, broke horses, built new corrals. Meadow worked beside him, and together they slowly brought the ranch back to life. That first winter was hard. They lost cattle to cold and predators, and money was tight. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire in their small house, Meadow reading aloud from whatever books they could get while Vincent carved or repaired tack. Sometimes they'd just talk about the past or the future, or nothing at all. Spring brought new life. The cattle they'd managed to save through winter had calves. The garden Meadow planted flourished. And one morning in late April, Meadow woke feeling sick and realized with dawning wonder that she was pregnant. She told Vincent that night over dinner. He went very still, his fork halfway to his mouth. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. I've been sick every morning for a week, and I'm late, and I know." She reached across the table for his hand. "We're going to have a baby." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise. He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that spoke of awe and love and protective devotion. "A baby," he murmured. "We're having a baby." Their son was born in January of 1880 during a cold snap that froze the water troughs and dusted the Texas landscape with snow. The midwife from town had come to help, and Vincent had paced outside like a caged animal until he heard the baby's first cry. They named him Marcus, after Meadow's father. He had Vincent's gray eyes and Meadow's dark hair, and he was the most perfect thing either of them had ever seen. "He's beautiful," Vincent whispered, holding his son with careful reverence. "He's perfect." Meadow watched her husband cradle their child and felt her heart expand in her chest. This man, this strong, gentle, protective man, was her husband, her partner, the father of her child. She'd nearly died to find him, had walked for days through pain and hunger and fear. But she'd do it all again for this moment, for this life they'd built together. The ranch prospered. With hard work and good management, they expanded their herd, bought more land, hired more hands. Vincent's reputation as an honest man and hard worker spread, and people sought him out for advice on horses and cattle. Meadow managed the books in the household, proving as capable with numbers as she was with a rope. 2 years after Marcus was born, they had a daughter. They named her Rose, and she was fierce from the moment she entered the world, screaming with impressive lungs and refusing to be soothed by anyone but her father. Vincent was helpless in the face of his daughter's demands, and Meadow often found him walking the floor at night, Rose sleeping peacefully in his massive arms while he sang soft, tuneless songs. The years rolled on. Marcus grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses as much as his father. Rose became a wild tomboy who could outride most of the ranch hands by the time she was 10. They added a third child, another boy they named Thomas, who was cheerful and easygoing and kept everyone laughing. Through it all, Vincent and Meadow's love deepened. They had arguments. Certainly two strong-willed people always would. But they never went to bed angry, and they never forgot what they'd survived to be together. Every night, Vincent would pull Meadow close and kiss her temple, and she'd rest her hand over his heart and feel it beat, steady and strong. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to Vincent's cabin in the mountains. They'd kept it all these years, paying a local man to check on it occasionally, and it was exactly as they'd left it. They spent 3 days there alone, leaving the children with Jack's wife, and it felt like coming home. "Do you ever regret it?" Meadow asked as they sat by the spring, their special place. Leaving the solitude, taking on a wife and family and all the complications that come with them? Vincent pulled her close and kissed her, slow and deep. "Not for a single second," he said. "You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning beyond just existing. I love you, Meadow. I've loved you since the moment I saw you lying at my cabin door, and I'll love you until the day I die." "And after," she said, touching her forehead to his. "I'll love you even after." They stayed until sunset, watching the light turn the mountains gold and purple. Then they rode back down to the life they'd built together, to the ranch and the children and the future that stretched out before them, bright with possibility. Years later, when they were old and gray and surrounded by grandchildren, someone would ask Meadow how she and Vincent had met. She'd smile and take her husband's still strong hand, and she'd tell the story of how she'd collapsed at his cabin door, starving and wounded and certain she was going to die, how he'd fed her first and asked questions later, how he'd protected her, fought for her, loved her. "He saved my life," she'd say, looking at Vincent with eyes that still held all the love of that first desperate kiss, "and then he gave me a reason to live it." Vincent would squeeze her hand and smile that rare, genuine smile, and their grandchildren would lean in closer, wanting to hear every detail of the greatest love story they knew. Because in the end, that's what it was, not just a tale of survival or danger or the Wild West. It was a love story, one that had begun with a woman at death's door and a mountain man who'd chosen compassion over caution, connection over solitude. It was a story of two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built a life that was richer and fuller than either had dreamed possible. It was a story of love and healing and the courage to open your heart even when the world had given you every reason to keep it closed. It was their story, and it was perfect. They lived long lives, Vincent and Meadow Irons. They saw their children grow and marry and have children of their own. They watched the ranch become one of the most successful in West Texas. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by 3 generations of family, and when Vincent stood to make a toast, his voice was still strong despite his years. 50 years ago," he said, "a woman collapsed at my cabin door. She was starving, wounded, and half dead. I could have turned her away. Lord knows I'd spent years pushing people away, convinced I was better off alone. But something made me help her. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was God giving me one last chance at happiness. Whatever it was the best decision I ever made." He looked at Meadow, and the love in his eyes was as fierce and true as it had been that first night they'd kissed. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Meadow Irons. You gave me a life worth living, a family to protect, and a love that has sustained me through everything. I would do it all again, 1,000 times over, just for one more day with you." Meadow stood and kissed him, not caring that their children and grandchildren were watching, not caring about anything except this man who had saved her life and then made it worth saving. "I love you," she whispered against his lips, "always and forever." "Always and forever," he echoed. They danced that night, slow and careful, their bodies remembering the steps even if their joints protested. Around them, their family laughed and celebrated, creating new memories to add to the collection of a lifetime. When Vincent Irons finally passed away at the age of 83, it was peacefully, in his sleep, with Meadow's hand in his. She held him as his breathing slowed and stopped, and she didn't cry. There would be time for tears later. In that moment, she just held him and thanked him silently for every day, every hour, every moment they'd shared. She joined him 6 months later, on a cool September morning, much like the one when she'd first stumbled to his cabin door. Their children found her in the garden, a smile on her face, and they knew she'd gone to be with Vincent. They buried her beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains in the distance. The headstone was simple. Vincent Irons, 1846–1929, Meadow Lancaster Irons, 1853–1930. Together in life, together in death, together in love. Their story became legend in that part of Texas. People would point out the ranch, still standing, still prosperous under the management of their descendants. They'd talk about the mountain man who'd given up his solitude for love, and the woman who'd survived impossible odds to find him. They'd tell the story to their children, who'd tell it to theirs, keeping alive the memory of a love that had conquered death and distance and danger. Because some stories deserve to be remembered. Some loves are too powerful to fade, and sometimes, when the world seems dark and hopeless, we need to remember that there are still people who will open their doors to strangers, who will protect the vulnerable, who will choose love over fear. Vincent and Meadow Irons were those people. And their love story, born in desperation, forged in danger, and perfected in the quiet moments of an ordinary life, remained a testament to the enduring power of human connection. It was a story that began with a woman collapsing at a cabin door, starving and wounded, and it ended with a love that would last forever.